to turn the mic on. I burned that the hard way. Okay. Yep.
Why would you work in there and not?
There we go.
Okay,
Here
so
is
we
Mike the first. Okay. So you are, I don't know if Josh mentioned, you are kind of constrained to the podium, so.
That's fine. I'll like hide.
Is this working, Josh?
This is the one that says words to the room, so they can hear me if I speak.
Yeah, that's the first one. This is the words to the cast.
Okay. Do I look cool? I feel very...
Turn table to the microphone, not two microphones. Okay. Welcome everyone. Welcome back to our, this is technically our March meeting, but we're holding it in April, so it's wild and crazy. So those of you who have seen me up here before may or may not know, my name is Rob Boyer. I'm on board with KWSQA. I've been doing this for a while now and contemplating a career in comedy. Your feedback is going to tell me whether I should go ahead with it. They hold an open night like at Rhapsody. I might go down there. You let me know. But more the things that you're interested in. Some announcements before we get to our speaker. The big announcements are surrounding our conference. We host Targeting Quality in the fall of every year. We're focusing on September in the last few years. This year will be September 23rd and 24th. We had our call for workshops. That's now closed. We're in the process of kind of going through them and finding the ones that we feel are best for the community. And those will be announced hopefully in the next week or so. The call for presentations is still open. I really encourage you, if you've ever considered speaking at a conference or speaking publicly about testing or testing topics, this is a really great opportunity. It is a very warm and open community, so it's a good opportunity for you to try something out and test your sea legs at speaking at conferences. So the call for presentation is open. It'll be open until the 28th of March, 28th of April. And then hopefully we're going to open up the registration by April 25th. So we won't necessarily know what the presentations are. We will have announced the workshops, and you'll get the early bird rate, which as always is our best rate of the year. A couple other things. We have our May meeting on May 1st. That's going to be, well, that's actually our April meeting, but we'll call it the May meeting. May 1st, and that's going to be a joint meeting with the Lansing Area Software Testing Group. And we're going to be doing, kind of a test clinic. It's a new idea for us, and what we're going to try and do is through webcasting and such, give an opportunity to get these two organizations together. It gives you an opportunity to kind of bring your problem and have two professional development communities give you feedback on it. Our second May meeting is not on the 2nd, it's on the 29th. And that's going to be James Spear, measuring quality, take your escape defects, count and stuff it. Then from there, we are going to have a June social. We'll take a couple months off, and then we will have our conference in September. So that is all of my announcements. Thank you for your patience. Please join me in welcoming Sam Campbell.
Everybody hear me okay? Okay, so I'm just going to switch over the presentation quickly. Oh, there's much of it. You guys missed all of this. Some of this looks cool. All right. All right. So today we're going to talk about really one of my favorite topics to talk about. My coworkers are entirely tired of hearing it, so now I get to share it with you. And that's making digital experiences more accessible. And when I talk about accessibility, it's more than what I hope is extremely familiar to you all now. The AODA legislation that's coming up, things like adding alt text to your images, things like semantic HTML. We're going to touch on those a little bit, and I hope it's a review, and then we're going to go into some other pieces of the web, what a good accessible experience looks like there, and really how you can check your own software, Twitter, presentations, really anything that you interact with to make sure it's the most accessible to the most amount of people. So who am I? I'm kind of bad at the humble brag. I was asked, like, what should we say after your name? I don't know. I've been a front-end developer for almost 10 years, which ages me a little bit, I guess. But currently, I'm at a company called Bungalow. We're in downtown Kitchener. And for them, I make web experiences. Before that, I was at D2L. Before that, a handful of startups and BlackBerry. I also run Girl Geek's Waterloo Region, which is a monthly networking and dinner series for women in STEM. So I love bringing together the community and connecting and just eating food and having conversations. So it's really cool to be here and knowing that there's other pockets kind of with that going on. These are the other extremely important things in my life. I have a dog and these 2 cats. And they're like my little zoo. We all live in our 1-bedroom apartment. So just a little note to myself, I'm not an expert in accessibility. I'm just a person that spends a ridiculous amount of time on the web and wondering about user experiences and digital interactions and building empathetic experiences. And really, when I started talking with more people on Twitter, I started learning, and there was this whole wealth of information. So I've tried to distill it into something that hopefully is memorable to everybody and that you can keep going forward. So what is accessibility? What is the AODA? How can you check for compliance? How do you fix some issues? And where do you go from there is what we're kind of going to go over today. So it should take about half an hour, and then I'll leave a little bit of room for questions. So just throwing some big numbers, about 57 million Americans have some kind of disability, 4 million Australians, 80 million people in the European Union, which includes Britain, and 3.8 million Canadians. So what is an accessibility under those numbers? Anything like difficulty lifting or grasping, cognitive, mental, or emotional impairment, vision impairment, things like color blindness, actual blindness, and any kind of hearing impairment. And what's interesting to me is you have to go outside of just the stats and think about your everyday user. Like people in this room, even myself, sometimes I have trouble lifting and grasping. I have a lot of trouble hearing. I wrecked myself with headphones, so you're all gonna not do that. Every year my vision gets worse and worse and worse. I've embraced the glasses, but it took me a little while to get over it. And then definitely things like color choices and user experience, and whether you're designing for left-handed or right-handed, you have to really think of it more holistically than, am I just looking at a specific disability? No, I'm looking at humans and how they interact with the digital world. So the AODA is legislation that exists in Ontario. There's at least 1.8 million people with a disability. Out of the about 4 million people in Canada, that's half, which makes sense. We're a really dense area of Canada, so it's good to have legislation to support that. And it has 5 categories. The first is information and communications, which covers the digital experiences part of this, but it also encompasses transportation, how you get on and off buses, how you interact with your community, how you employ people, and the design of public spaces like parks and museums and roads and everything around it. So if you love documentation, and I really do, there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They're beautifully documented. They're a fun read. They've done a really good job of explaining not only what you need to do, but why you need to do it. So if you ever have a question, like a quick Google through there is definitely where you'll start to find some answers. So by 2020, hopefully everyone is aware. If you're not, companies will have to conform to the WCAG 2.0 AA standard, which is much more stricter. Is that words? I don't know. But than what we have now. And really, when we're thinking about it, it's really a human rights violation to not have accessible experiences. You're literally stopping people in their tracks from getting information. So we'll take a moment to talk about screen readers. This is a really interesting kind of topic because there's so many of them. There's free ones, there's paid ones, there's popular ones, there's old ones that are maybe not updated as frequently. This is from the WebAIM screen reader survey, which was really of about 3,000 people, so it's not a true data set, but it's kind of a good overview. So screen readers work by mapping the contents of an interface to an accessibility tree. Well, what is that? So we know what the DOM is. It's the document object model. It's how websites are what the role is, and really this is kind of what your screen reader is going to be reading out. So that was just kind of a neat view that I more recently discovered. Chrome also has this audit tab where you can run an accessibility check on websites. What was interesting, and when I go into tool checking, is I'm going to recommend Axe, and the Chrome audit tool is actually based on the Axe engine. So using one or the other really is going to give you the same information presented differently. Oh, cool. Next slide. So if you want to do accessibility checking on any website, I love clicking around and slyly judging people, but it's really good if you're going into like a job interview and you want to be moderately impressive, if you want to check your own sites, if you want to kind of just poke around, there's a lot of really good information that's in there. And then there's also like external libraries on the DayQ website if you want to integrate accessibility checking into your automated testing. So we're going to go through just some common issues, some things I've seen around the web, and really what you can do about them. When you go in through this, some of this is part of the AODA, some of this is part of the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and some of this is just being a good human being and creating cool experiences for everyone. So the first is a pretty simple one. The page needs to be usable with a keyboard. And the way that you accomplish this the easiest is by using the right markup. So if you want to tab through any website, you can do this on your own, or if you're using a screen reader and you're using like arrow keys and the space and enter key, your anchor tags and your input tags are automatically going to receive keyboard focus. But something like a div tag or a list tag don't. Lists are a little bit different. The screen reader can see it, but they would need a tab index. If you're using your divs and your lists as a button, which is what I'm going to go into next. So realize that using the correct markup also now comes with accessibility benefits that you don't have to code yourself, which is really important. We're always talking about, oh, having to learn new things. The web is changing constantly. Well, it actually got like 10% better while taking a few steps back. So we can use some more semantic HTML and get really good benefits from it. So looking at something like a simple button tag, people don't like to override the button styles. They're like, oh, it's so much CSS, it's so much work, I'm gonna have to figure this out. But the button comes with so much more. It can be used with the enter and space keys, and the browser does treat that as a click event. The same with touchscreen interactions. So those first two right there are a lot of custom JavaScript to handle. It has hover, focus, and active states and knows how to remove them correctly, which is a CSS add-on that you would have to do. It receives tab focus and removes the tab focus when it's disabled. So just throwing that tab index on there, you have to remember that you also need to remove it when it's important, which is even more JavaScript. And then it has a disabled state to begin with. So you get all of that just by using the correct HTML, and you don't have to roll your own solutions. And the biggest part is even if you know all of the solutions, all the tags, all of the nesting, and you've coded this thing yourself beautifully, it might still have a mistake in it. And unless you're a true screen reader user, you might not be able to see that. And you might do things like get your users into keyboard traps when a pop-up comes up and the focus goes somewhere weird and they just can't get out of it. Well, they're gonna close your website and they're gonna go tell their friends that your website is bad and nobody's gonna go there anymore. Well, at least 8%. So the next is that our headings are in the right order. It's something that used to really frustrate me when we're using something like Word. I don't know what version of Word this is. I think it's XP, but this was the best screenshot. It made my life. Or you use Google Docs now, and you're using your headings to style your content. Screen readers won't do that. Read that very nicely. And also when you go to build out things like a table of contents and you're automatically generating things, it doesn't build out that nice tree for you. So you're doing yourself a disservice, you're doing other people a disservice. Just use them in the right order. And when you're on the web, there's only one H1 on a page. That's why it's number 1. All right. So next we're gonna talk about colors. They need to maintain a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. And I always was like, cool. I don't know what that means. It actually is the luminance ratio. Screens emit light, and that light, it can be measured. It's actually part of what comes along with your image. So we can measure that contrast. And we need to make sure that the light emitted between the foreground color and the background color has that 4.5 to 1 ratio. So there's lots of good checkers for that. That'll just do this for you. This is one I like because it's extremely simple and it does exactly what I want. So this is a pass. It's a dark blue text on a white background. It has a contrast ratio of 8.59 to 1, cool. And you can see that it passes the WCAG-AA, which is what we want, with both normal and large text. As a side note, large text is defined as 18 points, which is not pixels. So I think it was about 19-ish pixels, and larger that was safe, but it all depends really on your typeface. You're gonna have to look a little bit closer into what that converts into if you want it just to pass on large text. So this one we expect to fail. It's a really weird yellow on a white background. It's actually kind of hard to read now. This one we also expect to fail, and we get really mad if people use. But as a side story, in high school, I was in a web dev class, and someone made it was like make your own website, and it was still in like the age of tables, so it was like nesting tables everywhere and changing the colors. And they made something that looks like this. And the teacher was like, haha, what are you, colorblind? And he went, yeah, right? And I hope that teacher feels like a bad person. So just keep those things in mind, even when you're looking at other people's work, that color is not the most important. So that failed, but also this fails. And this, you're like, oh, it's pretty. It's like purple with a cute like gray in front of it, but it's still kind of hard to read. And so what I do is if I want to use something like this, is I go and I tweak those different sliders here, and just by moving it over a little bit, you can get a really similar look and feel, and still have a good contrast ratio. Okay, so why are we doing this? We're like, oh, we're doing this for the colorblind. Again, but what is colorblindness? I'm going to give you an extremely simplified explanation of what colorblindness can be by someone who has Googled it for you. So really, I found it was easier to think of it as more of a color deficiency. So worldwide, 8% of men and 0.5% of women have some kind of color deficiency. And it can be hard for them to distinguish between shades of colors, identify the difference between colors, really all the colors. So if they're red deficient, it might look something like this. And when we think of red and green deficiency, we think of them being wildly different, but they're actually very similar. People can have trouble distinguishing between the reds, greens, browns, and oranges. And these all have much longer medical names that I can't pronounce and wouldn't really be meaningful to us, but you can definitely look them up. So green deficiency, if I flip back and forth, they're extremely similar. Oh, spoiler. And you can tell that definitely, even us looking at the second picture, it's hard to tell the difference between the colors. Blue deficiency is a bit more rare. Everything to them looks different shades of blue and red and violet. And then people with monochromatic vision are extremely, extremely rare. I think it was like 1 in 33,000. But these are extreme examples. Realize that color deficiencies are a spectrum. So you might have a little bit of one deficiency or a lot, and it might be something that's come upon gradually, or it could be something that you're born with. It might be something you might not even realize. So really, color should not ever be the only method of conveying important information. Because you don't know who the consumer is. So things like error messages should have labels. It shouldn't just be a red outline around your box that's not meaningful. Things like infographics and maps, they have labels as well as having like color to, if you think of a subway map that's colored. Things like flow charts and diagrams that you might be making to explain software, and definitely images. All right. Moving on to links and buttons must have meaningful text. You look at these, you're like, where am I going? What am I doing? What is this arrow? I don't like the Sherlock thing as a, I know it's a magnifying glass, as a search bar. Like it's confusing. Nobody in the world should ever click a click here button, because Lord knows where that goes. So don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your users. But you can do something like include screen reader only text. And you're not going to do it this way. You're not going to throw a display none or a visibility hidden. You're not going to make the width or the height 0, because if you go back to our accessibility tree, if you use any of these, it's going to remove the content from the visual flow of the page, not be in the accessibility tree, and just be not there for anyone. So good for hiding things, but hiding from everyone. So there's kind of two ways. The modern way of doing it is to make something one by one, clip it in so it's basically invisible and give it an absolute positioning. The other way is to take something and throw it 1,000 pixels off the screen. That way it's still in your DOM tree, it's still in your accessibility tree, and your screen readers can read it. A lot of this actual snippet is from the Bootstrap code, so a lot of modern frameworks, if they have screen reader only text, they've taken this into consideration for you. All right, so I've given versions of this talk a few times. I get lots of questions. It helps make it awesome. So one of the ones was, how do I make content invisible to screen readers? And I really want you to ask yourself why you would want to make something invisible to a screen reader that you would make visible to somebody else. You might have an area that's like interactive and there's just no way that a screen reader or somebody with an assisted device could interact with it. But I feel like it's better to have maybe some text around that or an explanation as opposed to just like hiding something and it's really just a blank for them. But if you absolutely need to, you can use an ARIA hidden tag on it. Know that that hides things by the section. So if you put ARIA hidden on a parent, all of its children will be hidden, and you can't override that. Like the screen reader will just skip over it. And it doesn't work on any element like a button or a link, which makes sense because browsers are smart enough to realize that you really don't want to hide those things. All right, the next thing is that form labels need to have, or form inputs need to have labels that are labels. So you can do this a bunch of different ways. You can do it implicitly by wrapping your tags in a label. You can do it explicitly by using the for and saying this label is for this element. Or you can use an ARIA label to talk to a screen reader. Placeholder text is not a label. Placeholder text is for input masking. It's for telling your users like the format of a phone number or the format of a postal code. Screen readers aren't going to read this nicely if they do at all. Recall back at the beginning that there are a plethora of screen readers all at different stages of development. People have access to different ones and they actually do different things. So there's no guarantee that your screen reader, the user's screen reader, is advanced enough to figure out what this is. And also, this is a really annoying user experience as a person, because as soon as you click on that, if there's not handling around it, that label's going to disappear. So I've mentioned ARIA labels a few times. They're accessible rich internet application, sure, but it's just a format, a data format, where screen readers can consume kind of a set of labels that might give them more information that a visual user wouldn't have. So you use ARIA roles when the technology used doesn't support semantic HTML. I'm a Vue.js developer. There's a lot of ARIA labels in that. React has a lot. A lot of these new modern web frameworks, they're really doing weird things with the DOM. So to kind of undo and still make everything accessible, there's a lot of different ARIA going on in there. You have to look into it to make sure that it's doing what you need, and then you can kind of trust the framework. That's why some of the newer frameworks that are coming out, it's not always best just to use the flavor of the month, because maybe they haven't taken accessibility into account yet. So some just like more simple examples beyond a framework. If you want to take your button and make it a clickable div or an SVG that does something cool, you're going to have to add in roles around it. If you have custom expand and collapse sections, if you're building custom navigation, which is my own personal horror story, please do not. It doesn't work out. When you try in JavaScript different navs together, you're adding so many rules and changing them and trying to support so many different screen readers that it just becomes a mess. It's much better to use semantic HTML and then move it around with CSS. All right, so videos need captions and/or transcripts. They definitely do, except for this little tiny edge case, but I'm still going to say they definitely do. So why? So synchronized video captions help more than those who are deaf or hard of hearing. They help those with cognitive and learning disabilities. And that, again, just like color blindness, just like hearing disabilities, just like really anything on this list can encompass so much that is better to do than do not. Myself, I love captions on videos. People have different accents. There's different levels of environmental noise. When you're trying to learn a different language or somebody is coming in and trying to consume your content, I'm speaking very quickly now. People speak very quickly in videos. It's great to have kind of either that synchronized captioning or a transcript. And then also with transcripts, search engines index your videos and their content better. So voice recognition software, again, because of the reasons we need video captions, is not very good. There can be different ambient noise, there can be multiple people talking, and it doesn't know how to distinguish between the words. So they're great for helping you create a first pass at your captions, and they definitely, almost 100% of the time, need to be edited. So you can do something fun, which is Google YouTube caption fails. And these were definitely the safer work ones that appeared, so I will let you go and explore the other ones in your own time. And yes, these were the only two safe ones I could find. All right, so images need alt tags, except for a really tiny edge case, but no, images need alt tags. And if they're decorative, you leave the alt tag empty, and that just denotes a decorative image. But don't get all verbose with your tags. It's not like a room full of various people watching a screen on and on and on. No, it's a group watching a presentation, like end of sentence. And definitely if the image is decorative or if it's a logo, definitely just leave a small little bit and then wonder why it's there. If it's not adding anything for your screen reader users, is it adding anything for your other users? All right, my personal vendetta is against tiny text. Again, I work on a screen all the time. My eyesight gets worse and worse every year. And I find it really frustrating when I try and read documentation or go on a website or receive a design for a designer and they've put something in like 11 pixel font. I don't know. So in the case of this PowerPoint, I tried not to use anything smaller than 24 points so that even on the smallest of screens, everything should still be legible. And I mean it, like I'm extremely vocal about my fight against the tiny text. So this was from a course on web text that I took, and it said that the recommended size for today's screens is 16 pixels for mobile and from 18 to 22 pixels for desktop, and that's body copy, not headers. If you go on something like Medium and read, their body copy is actually 20 pixels. All right, so I got another question. What about email clients like Gmail, which only give you normal, large, huge as text options? You want to make an accessible email. You're going to send it to whomever. Well, really, the other tweet was a guideline. The actual rule is that, except for captions and images of text, text needs to be resized without assistive technology. So like by your mouse and zooming up to 200% without the loss of the content or the loss of the page functionality. So sometimes, more than sometimes, when you resize a website, divs start moving around. Sometimes the responsiveness kicks in, but most of the time it's just things pushing outside of their boxes and your website not knowing how to handle that. And that makes things like links not work, especially in clickable divs. So just taking that like 5 seconds to zoom in on your website and see what happens solves the problem. All right. This is my favorite and somewhat newer section. Twitter is an awesome place for a developer or somebody in technology if you can filter and curate out some of the garbage that gets spewed into there. There's some really thoughtful discussion, there's some really good ideas, and so I'm going to share some of them here. And any tweets that I've shared, these are great influencers or just some cool people, so feel free to follow them. So when we're looking at a Twitter experience, you're spewing out 240 characters of something, like you want to make it as small as possible, and a cool thing is to have a lot of hashtags and maybe hashtags with multiple words. So Pascal casing is just camel casing where you capitalize the first word of each letter. But if you look at this first one, when we're reading out names, you can see that her name, all lowercase, kind of gets blurred together and isn't representative of what she wanted it to be. And as soon as she did the Pascal casing and capitalized, it read it out properly as Tatiana T-Mac. So Twitter also has the option to add captions and image like their equivalent of alt tags. No. So it's really, don't do that. And also when you have strings of emoji, try and keep it to 1 or 2. It's definitely a know your audience type of thing. There's like games where it's like, guess what this is based on the string of emoji. Cool. But if you are a business, if you are somebody building a personal brand and you want your content to be accessible to the most amount of people possible, don't chain your emojis. Don't use them between every sentence. Just don't do the clapping thing. Like, it's really old now. It's not cool. But then again, thinking about your audience, this is someone who wants to teach accessibility, who's doing the screamy caps yelling, which is another